The Culinary Incident at Sector B12. Part 1, The Forbidden Flavor. The Brosien Culinary Archive was the most secure building on the nutrient-rich world of Grelks. Guarded by plasma moats, interspecies biometric locks, and neural alarm matrices, it stored recipes that had shaped the political map of 6 galaxies. The famed Battle of Soup Stars? One with a fermented broth. The 6-flavor uprising? Resolved when the Calvar ambassador tasted a properly aged gorl paste. And yet, despite its gravity, despite its solemn reverence, one curious event would bring the archive to its knees: not sabotage, not war. A human. "Your presence here is highly irregular," said Archivist Rull, his voice bubbling from a siphon near his thorax. "Humans lack the sensory range for full taste interpretation. Your kind has only 5 taste profiles." Richard Beckett smiled politely, ignoring the veiled insult. 6, actually. "And besides, rumor says your archives hold the rarest spice in the galaxy." Rull's membranes flushed a dangerous shade of purple. "We do not traffic in spice. This is not some barbaric kitchen world. This is the sacred epicenter of gastronomic diplomacy." Richard didn't seem to hear. He was leaning forward, sniffing delicately at the air. "Smells like burnt cinnamon and wet socks," he muttered. "Interesting. Also, your air's about 96% hydrogenated gas. I might need to burp later." Rull's appendages coiled tightly. "If not for the Intergalactic Cultural Exchange Treaty, I would have you sterilized and sent back to Terra in a jar." "Charming," Richard replied, pulling out a small notepad with the words, "Tasting Journal," scribbled in crude ink across the top. "Lead on, my purple friend. Let's taste history." Inside Vault B12, the most sacred chamber in the archive, sat a single cube of what looked like rusted cheese. It was locked behind 9 levels of security, protected by biometric screen gates, and guarded by 2 culinary monks whose taste receptors had been surgically enhanced to detect deceit through umami vibrations. "This," Rull whispered, "is Vorqual essence. It is not to be seen, touched, or discussed. It is only to be contemplated through flavor resonance. It is illegal on 72 planets." Richard's eyes sparkled. "Why?" Rull blinked. "Excuse me? Why is it illegal?" Rull's siphon flared. "Because one molecule can cause involuntary existential weeping in 12 species. It once caused a Crevulian prime minister to embrace a pile of potatoes and proclaim them his ancestors. Entire wars have begun after unauthorized tastings." Richard scribbled something. "Highly reactive umami resonance, potential as a fusion base for chili." "Chili? It's like war, but in a bowl." Rull recoiled in horror. Richard's quarters were, to outward sensors, exactly as ordered: sterile, contained, and culturally respectful. But just under the floor panel, in a carefully shielded pocket of silence, sat a modified slow cooker, an atmospheric distillation unit, and one very illegal sliver of Vorqual essence. "Just a nibble," Richard whispered. "For research." The moment the cube hit the broth, the sensors blinked out across 3 wings of the facility. AI assistants forgot their names. The security chief tasted nostalgia. Somewhere in the sky, a satellite declared itself a father and started broadcasting lullabies. Richard lifted the spoon, blew once, and sipped. He blacked out instantly. When he awoke, the AI assistant was sitting beside him in the form of a holographic duck. "Am I dead?" Richard asked. "No," the duck said. "But the flavor triggered 12 simultaneous neural pathways. You achieved minor transcendence. Congratulations." "Did I say anything embarrassing?" "You declared the superiority of Earth tacos and tried to write a treaty in tomato paste." "Sounds like me." The duck shimmered. "Security is on the way." "Oh no." "Yes." Richard sighed, dragged the slow cooker under the bed, and started preparing his second batch. After all, the first rule of intergalactic cooking was never waste a transcendental reduction. Part 2, Spice Crimes and Flavor Tribunals. When the alarms finally stopped echoing through the vaulted corridors of the Brosien Culinary Archive, what followed was worse. Silence. The kind of silence that suggested sacred traditions had been violated, recipe scrolls desanctified, and a diplomatic incident stewed slowly to a roiling boil. Archivist Rull stood trembling at the entrance to Richard Beckett's assigned habitat pod, 3 limbs raised in ceremonial accusation, 2 others holding a purification torch. Behind him, a delegation of culinary monks and tribunal observers in ornamental fermentation robes filed in. He must answer to the Council of Taste, Rull intoned solemnly. Under Article 17 of the Intergalactic Gastronomic Accord. Inside the pod, the air was thick with something pungent and undeniably appetizing. Richard, wearing a stained apron that said "Kiss the Chef, if you dare," looked up from a bubbling vat. "Oh, hey. Anyone want to try the second batch? I toned down the umami just a smidge. Thought the last one had too much of a weep factor." Rull's torch sputtered and fizzled as it absorbed the rising vapor. The archivist staggered backward, choking on what could only be described as spiritual flavor. "I can taste my childhood," whispered a monk, tears already welling. "You're all so dramatic," Richard muttered, tasting a spoonful and jotting notes. Longing with top notes of sandalwood regret. "Okay, that's weirdly poetic. You are not authorized to prepare Vorqual essence in any form," Rull shouted. "That compound is legally classified as a class zoetic psychogustatory weapon." "Right," Richard said, standing up, arms akimbo. "But I didn't weaponize it. I cooked with it. That's like saying a spoon is a threat because it could scoop out someone's eye." There was a collective intake of breath, filtered through gills, spiracles, and telepathic membranes. "That metaphor is unsettlingly accurate," one observer murmured. Rull composed himself, adjusting the ceremonial crest of his jelly crown. "You are hereby placed under arrest for flavor breach, Section C-14, unauthorized transcendental cooking." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Is there a trial, or do you just vaporize me with hot sauce?" "There is a tribunal," Rull growled. "You will be judged before the Council of Flavor. You may speak in your defense, but be warned, they have condemned entire species over burnt hollandaise." "I once won a chili cook-off in New Mexico," Richard said. "I'll take my chances." The Council of Flavor convened in the Grand Gastronomic Amphitheater, a vast dome of crystalline sugar glass and edible stalactites. In the center, seated on a rotating lazy Susan of judgment, were the 5 judges. Grand Sapatrix Carull, whose tongue extended 12 feet and could distinguish 17 kinds of salt. Mistress Umama, a sentient mushroom colony known to dissolve liars with flavorless spores. Justice Glore, a robotic palate simulator that could analyze morality through spice balance. Chef Relin the Binder, infamous for unifying the 9th sector through soufflé diplomacy. And Larry, an Earth diplomat who accidentally ate a sacred dumpling in 2142 and was never allowed to leave. Richard was brought before them, still wearing his apron. "You stand accused of culinary sacrilege," Carull began. "How do you plead?" "Hungry," Richard said. Murmurs. Chuckles. A gasp from Larry. "He cannot be allowed to mock the sacred spice rites," Umama declared, one of her caps releasing a defensive puff of spores. "I'm not mocking them," Richard said. "I'm elevating them. I tasted your forbidden cube, yeah. And it was extraordinary. But dangerous? Only if you don't know how to use it. You destabilized 12 sectors," Justice Glore chimed in, voice like a blender full of gravel. "You fried 2 AI systems and made the janitor believe he was a biscotti." "Look," Richard said, stepping forward, "your species have spent centuries treating food like volatile magic. And yeah, it is magic. But back home, we don't lock it away. We explore it. We blend cultures. We create. He pulled out a small container. Inside was something golden, thick, and bubbling. I call this transcendental gumbo. The smell hit the judges like a sonic boom made of nostalgia and rosemary. Even Glor's processors hummed in delight. I've used Vorkwal essence, but balanced it with Terran crawfish stock, Drenkian black pepper oil, and a dash of earthling paprika. Also, a shot of whiskey. Alcohol? Carol whispered. Flavor courage, Richard replied. Larry started weeping quietly. Back in the gallery, diplomats from 15 species watched with slackened jaws. Newsfeeds swarmed. Recipes were tweeted across star systems. Several culinary guilds declared emergencies. When the judges finally passed sentence, it was unprecedented. Richard Beckett, Mistress Umama said, fungal caps trembling, "You are not guilty." Gasps. Instead, Carol added, "You are named Intergalactic Flavor Envoy." A full silence descended. What? You will be given full diplomatic immunity and a traveling spice license, said Glor. Your task, to introduce controlled doses of forbidden flavors to the rest of the galaxy. Under supervision, of course. Supervision? Rull stepped forward, looking like he'd chewed lemongrass and regret. I'll be your monitor. Against my better judgment. Richard grinned. So, I get to keep cooking? You will report weekly. All recipes must be logged. All ingredients catalogued. All transcendental experiences rated on a 10-point Enlightenment Index. And what about the archive? Carol smiled with 12 tongues. We are opening a new section, the Human Fusion Wing. Later, back in his quarters, now upgraded to a traveling kitchen module the size of a star skiff, Richard prepared his next dish. A stew of spotty root, Tellurian cream sauce, and a curious bean from Ganymede that caused mild prophetic dreams. Rull, arms crossed, glared from across the room. I still hate this. You tasted the gumbo, Richard said without looking up. You cried. 3 times. It made me see my great-grand broth. Exactly. Rull exhaled from a spiracle. Next planet is the Zephyri homeworld. No taste buds. Only smell-based memory ingestion. Oh, Richard said, eyes lighting up. I've got a perfect idea. He began sketching on his notepad again, underlined in large bold letters. The aroma of empathy, served with croutons. Part 3, the smell of memory. The Zephyri homeworld did not believe in taste. To the sense-sensitive inhabitants of Ctel Prime, food was not chewed, swallowed, or digested, it was inhaled. Aromas were absorbed through complex spiracles across their carapace. Culinary tradition revolved around vapor rituals, scent harmonics, and memory-triggered whiffs that could collapse an ambassador to the floor in nostalgia. Richard Beckett arrived with 2 suitcases and a dangerous smile. Rull followed with a flame-retardant spice mask and a growing sense of dread. Just promise me, Rull grumbled as they stepped off the shuttle onto the pink mist landing pad, that whatever you do this time will not trigger religious enlightenment. Again. No promises, Richard replied, pulling out a small bottle labeled Liquid Regret, Reduced. The Zephyri emissary greeted them with a series of crisp puffs. Her name was Ambassador Efaricht, a name pronounced with a sinus oscillation that left Richard's eyebrows twitching. Welcome, Envoy Beckett, she said through a translator orb, her spiracles gently fluttering. We have prepared an open aroma forum for your demonstration. We hope to experience your offering. Oh, you will, Richard said, eyeing the city skyline of floating aroma domes, scent gardens, and one gigantic nostalgia diffuser suspended from cables. Efaricht's spiracles tensed ever so slightly. Rull sighed. I'll alert the Cultural Damage Control Unit. The forum was a translucent bubble 200 meters wide, hovering above the sea of misted thoughts. Inside, the air shimmered with complex scent harmonics, the alien equivalent of polite applause. Richard stood at the center, his aroma dispersal unit pulsing like a breathing dragonfly. Beside him, 5 carefully selected flasks, each labeled with words that defied translation. One was simply called Wednesday. He stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies, gentle aliens, and sentient fog clusters, today I bring you something radical. A fusion of cultures. A scent with texture." Several Zephyri fluttered in alarm. Scent with texture was a highly experimental concept, bordering on offensive jazz. "This aroma," Richard continued, lifting the first flask, "is called Campfire at Dusk." The cap released with a hiss. Silence. Then, a wave. It washed over the audience like the breeze before a storm. Hints of ash, pine sap, roasting something indistinct but homey, and the bittersweet ache of endings. Several Zephyri collapsed to the floor, overwhelmed by the sudden memory of something they'd never experienced. "My spiracles are weeping," whispered a historian. Efariq steadied herself on a railing. "It's reminiscent of departure." Richard nodded. "It's designed that way. We call it nostalgia." Rull leaned over. "This is the part where they elect you their god." "Not yet," Richard whispered. "Now comes dessert air." The second scent was pink and syrupy and, somehow, full of childlike laughter. It carried notes of fruit, melted sugar, and distant thunder. The effect was immediate. An entire delegation of elder Zephyri began chirping involuntarily. "He has accessed the second spiral," one said. "He has walked the path of scented memory." "No," Richard said, interrupting gently, "I just recreated the smell of cotton candy and thunderstorms. It's a classic Earth amusement park combo." They didn't understand the words, but the meaning soaked into them like a good brine. Suddenly, a bell rang. It was not a normal bell. It was the memory bell, a sacred sound reserved for moments when a civilization encountered something so profound, so foreign, that it rewrote an entire branch of cultural philosophy. Richard had now triggered it twice in 2 planets. That evening, in the temporary diplomatic suite provided by the Zephyri, Rull floated face down in an aroma bath, groaning. "This can't keep happening," he said. "They've declared you an honorary nostalgarch. They've given you a scent name. It's 12 characters long and only readable through olfactory resonance." "Nice," Richard said, flipping through his notes. "Does it smell good?" "It smells like cinnamon and unresolved childhood trauma." Richard scribbled a new recipe idea. "The Intergalactic Council is getting nervous," Rull continued. "You've disrupted 2 planetary cultures in a week. They're not going to keep letting you stir entire civilizations like a galactic gumbo." "But that's the point," Richard said, setting down his pad. "This galaxy has calcified. Food's sacred, sure, but it's frozen. It's ritual, not creativity. I'm just giving it a stir." Rull sat up. "You sound like a culinary revolutionary." "Maybe I am," Richard grinned. There was a knock, if you could call a series of scent bursts a knock. Efariq entered, her spiracles glowing faintly. "You are summoned," she said. "The scented ancients wish to smell you again. There is talk of opening the deep vault." Rull stiffened. "The deep vault? You've barely met the man." Efariq fluttered. "It is said he bears the aroma of the beforetime." "I wore the same socks for 2 days," Richard offered. No one laughed. "This is serious," Rull muttered. "Of course it is," Richard said. "It's cuisine." The deep vault was not a room. It was a moment. Richard stepped into a sealed chamber where pressure shifted with thought and gravity bent to mood. In the center was a crystal, pulsing gently, containing the first scent, the ancestral memory of the Zephyri, believed lost to translation. "You may open it," said Efariq, "but beware. To smell it is to understand who we were, before we had names. Richard nodded solemnly. He uncapped his final flask. And released Grandma's kitchen during a thunderstorm. The room became still. The ancient crystal pulsed in time with the scent. For the first time in centuries, the Zephyri inhaled the ancestral scent in harmony with something alien, and they understood. Not in words. In feeling. Someone outside began singing an old cooking chant. Inside the chamber, the scent danced between cultures, blending grief and joy, memory and invention, like a stew of civilizations finally simmered to perfection. When Richard emerged, the entire Zephyri delegation bowed, not out of submission, but solidarity. "You are not a chef," Efariq said, "you are a memory artist." Rull face-bombed with all 6 limbs. Richard smiled and whispered, "Wait till they taste lasagna." Part 4, Boil Point Diplomacy on Varrock 9. The first thing Richard Beckett noticed about Varrock 9 was that it was very much on fire. Not metaphorically. Literally. The planet's surface shimmered with a fine haze of superheated vapor, and molten rivers wove between obsidian mountains. Its atmosphere, thick with chemical tang and floating embers, smelled like roasted metal and regret. The second thing he noticed was that his welcome party was wearing oven mitts on their heads. "Envoy Beckett," said the lead delegate, a towering crustacean-esque being with steam vents along its carapace. "I am Flark. First flame stirrer of the culinary furnace and grand taster of Boil Point Court." Richard raised a hand in a casual wave, his insulated travel apron already starting to sizzle. "Nice to meet you. Is it supposed to be this, crispy?" "Yes," Flark replied. "Our cuisine is forged, not cooked. We do not simmer here. We challenge ingredients." "Sounds spicy," Richard said, wiping his brow. "Perfect." Behind him, Rull stumbled out of the shuttle in a heat-resistant bubble suit. "I'm melting," he wheezed. "No you're not," Richard said. "You're blanching. It's a compliment here." Rull grumbled something about diplomatic immunity and heat stroke. The Boil Point Court was less a kitchen, more a forge cathedral. Glowing iron walkways suspended over bubbling magma pools. Conveyor belts of raw alien ingredients passed beneath fire blades and plasma torches. Chefs, no, culinarchs, wielded culinary weapons that looked like torture devices and moved with the deadly grace of martial artists. Richard was in love. "Let me guess," he said to Flark. "You grade your chefs by how many eyebrows they've burned off." "Correct," Flark said, gesturing to a nearby sous chef who proudly had none. "This is Varka. Her left hand is entirely heat-scabbed. She once stir-fried a night beast during a solar flare. I'd like to buy her a drink. She drinks vinegar laced with acid salt. Still counts." The demonstration began with Flark lifting a huge ladle made of dark stone. "We have prepared a trial dish for you, Envoy Beckett. It is called Searing Regret on a Bed of Charred Honesty. It is a test of spirit, pain tolerance, and digestive fortitude." "What's the spice level?" Richard asked, already pulling out a spoon. "On our scale? It ranks between unexpected enlightenment and screaming rebirth." "Perfect." Rull covered his face. The first bite seared his tongue. The second singed memory. The third. "Oh sweet flaming Jupiter," Richard gasped, tears streaming, "that's delicious." Gasps echoed around the chamber. The assembled culinarchs, previously standing with folded arms and skeptical venting, now leaned forward. "You are not immolating?" Flark asked. "Nope," Richard said, voice hoarse. "Mouths on fire, souls in pain, but this spice blend? The balance. You've got umami hiding behind existential terror. I love it." Rull scribbled frantically, note, human mouth tissue absurdly resilient. Possibly masochistic. Impressed, the Viraki invited Richard to the sacred grill pit, an honor never before extended to a non-vented species. Here, chefs performed the rite of the rolling broil, a competitive duel where combatants seared ingredients in mid-air using only flame gestures and emotional intent. "This is our most sacred challenge," Flark said solemnly. "You may choose your weapon." Richard selected a spatula. "Forged in lava or," Flark trailed off. "From a food truck in Texas," Richard said. Unassuming, but deadly in the right hands. His opponent was Varka, the eyebrowless legend. Her chosen weapon was a double-bladed thermal whisk. They squared off over a slab of rare Grand Beast flank suspended above a magma chasm. The match began with a roar of fire. Varka spun into a series of blinding flourishes, whipping air currents into vortexes that caramelized the meat's exterior with poetic precision. Richard, by contrast, flipped the steak lazily, then basted it with a secret sauce he pulled from his belt pouch. The aroma alone made half the court moan involuntarily. "Is that," Flark stammered, "a barbecue glaze?" "Peachwood smoked." "Aged 6 years," Richard replied, twirling the spatula. Gasps. Someone in the gallery fainted. The final move came as both chefs hurled their steaks skyward. Varka's spiraled, encased in rotating heat fields. Richard's glowed gently, perfectly medium rare, trailing a lazy curl of vapor that smelled like nostalgia and 4th of July. When the steaks landed, Flark took one bite of each. His steam vents whistled softly. "The foreigner," he said at last, "has brought balance to the boil." That night, Richard was declared an honorary heat sage. The Viraki forged a ceremonial skillet in his honor. He named it Susan. Rull was less amused. "This is madness," he muttered back at the hotel dome, where the ambient temperature was only marginally below active incineration. "You're disrupting culinary orthodoxy again." "I'm not disrupting," Richard said, polishing Susan with a hand towel. "I'm just seasoning the pan of galactic stagnation." Rull groaned. "Do you have to speak in food metaphors?" "Yes," Richard replied. "It's in my flavor contract." A ping sounded on the wall console. The Intergalactic Council was calling. Rull opened the feed, revealing a bored diplomat with eyes like boiled eggs. "You've been reassigned," the diplomat said flatly. "There's a situation on Rulun." "Let me guess," Richard said. "They eat through their feet, worship cutlery, and just discovered mayonnaise." "They're afraid of mayonnaise," the diplomat replied. "Also, you've been nominated for the Golden Tongue of Peace." Rull dropped his cup. Richard smiled. "Well," he said, standing and cracking his knuckles, "guess it's time to pack the spatula." Part 5, Mayonnaise and the Fear Ritual of Rulun. The skies of Rulun were the color of old dishwater and smelled faintly of boiled rubber. Richard Beckett stood at the edge of the primary landing platform, holding a jar of mayonnaise like it was a sacred scroll. "This," he said dramatically, "is your destiny." The Ruluni delegation screamed in unison and fell to the ground, shielding their eye stalks. Rull, who had spent the past 4 days reading up on local customs while sweating into his anxiety gland, buried his face in both palms. "I told you not to show them the jar right away." "I wrapped it," Richard argued. "That's restraint. You wrapped it in transparent film. They could see the emulsion. That's the part that offends them." The Ruluns, gelatinous creatures shaped like hourglasses made of living pudding, began to slither backward while muttering their fear hymn, a low, vibrating hum that curdled milk within a 30-meter radius. Richard sighed and tucked the mayo back into his pack. "Fine. No mayonnaise. Yet." A tall, quivering Rulun with ceremonial toothpicks embedded across its body floated forward, trembling. "The human must cleanse his presence," it rasped. "He carries the condiment of chaos." "That," Richard said with a grin, "is flavor enhancement. Also, you haven't even tried it with fries." The ambassador recoiled with a pained slosh. Fries? Fried starch vessels? Cultural exchange is a journey, Rull muttered through clenched spiracles, not a trauma response. Rulon's capital was a low, undulating sprawl of gelatin towers and cooling pools. Everything shimmered. Everything was soft. And every building smelled faintly like lemon-scented plastic. The humans were granted residence in the quivering diplomatic vestibule, a structure that adjusted its size based on the occupants' confidence. By the time Richard finished unpacking his pressure cooker and emergency condiments kit, it had inflated to nearly twice its size. "You're making it arrogant," Rull warned. "Good," Richard said. "It'll need that confidence if we serve potato salad to a species that flinches at whipped air." "I'm begging you," Rull said, rubbing his frontal lobe, "do not start another planet-wide theological crisis." "Not over, aioli." "Technically, that's a different emulsion," Richard corrected. "And don't worry, I'm playing this one subtle." Subtle lasted 12 hours. At the grand ritual of scentless acceptance, a silent gathering in which Rulons floated in concentric spirals and tried to out-vibrate one another in humble stillness, Richard brought snacks. Not just any snacks. Deviled eggs. He didn't mean to. It was muscle memory. A quiet ceremony, a room full of twitchy hosts, and Richard's ingrained social instinct had kicked in. Bring a plate. He set the eggs down gently on the offering platform, right between a bowl of colorless paste and a floating cube labeled emotion sponge. The response was immediate. One Rulon made a noise like a drowning blender and collapsed into a trembling heap. Another launched into the air and burst open like an overripe jelly fruit. And a third, high-ranking spiritual official, simply whispered, "Egg chaos," and slid down a drain. Rull turned to Richard very slowly. "What part of subtle?" "They're classic," Richard said helplessly. "Creamy yolk, a bit of Dijon." "Dijon?" Rull's voice cracked like an overheated spatula. "They call mustard sun poison. It's tangy. Not dangerous. You made hell bites, Richard. You served infernal pods of social disintegration at their most sacred moment of communal silence." Richard folded his arms. "Well, they're welcome." A tribunal was convened. The Council of Wobbling Dignity met beneath the shade canopy of forgiveness, their bodies vibrating in careful shame frequencies. Richard stood before them, hands behind his back, feet bare as dictated by local etiquette. His apron read, "I regret nothing, but I'd do it again with paprika." The head counselor, a pale golden Rulon named Erlolu, spoke via resonance pad. "The human has committed a gustatory heresy. The ritual spiral has been contaminated with emulsified yolk." "You make it sound gross," Richard muttered. "It is gross." Rull hissed from the sidelines, swaddled in a diplomatic dampening shawl. "I didn't mean offense," Richard said, louder now. "I meant introduction. A bridge between taste and tradition. Eggs are sacred to us. They represent potential. And they taste great with a dab of mayo and a whisper of smoked salt." Silence. Then, after a long, trembling pause, Erlolu said, "Show us this bridge." "Through ritual. Through food." Rull's gasp could have suctioned the atmosphere. 3 hours later, the ritual kitchen was assembled. A floating coliseum of transparent gelatin levels, spiral stacked above a pool of diplomatic neutrality fluid. The audience floated in padded sympathy tubes. A full security team of sentient sponges watched from hidden alcoves. Richard stood at the center, armed with a whisk, a wooden spoon, and an expression of stubborn optimism. Before him, the ingredients of planetary destiny. Eggs. Oil. Vinegar. Lemon. And fear. Rull hovered nearby, mumbling to himself. "We're going to get embargoed by flavor." Richard cracked the eggs into the mixing vessel. The room shuddered. He added oil in a slow, delicate stream. The council flinched. He whisked. The tension tightened like the surface of a skin pudding. And then, it began to emulsify. Slowly. Iridescent. Magical. Richard added a touch of lemon. Just a drop. And then, he dipped a spoon, tasted it, and smiled. He turned to Erlulu. Your turn. The counselor recoiled. I cannot. Then you'll never know, Richard said softly, why we bother. Why food matters. Why we risk so much, just for taste. A long pause. Then Erlulu extended a trembling tasting tendril. The mayo touched the tip. The entire arena fell silent. Then, a deep, resonant vibration. Not fear. Not panic. Joy. A laughter vibration. Oh, Erlulu said, stunned. It's like, smooth truth. The crowd exploded into vibrations of astonishment. A jelly chorus erupted, the creamy unifier. Richard just bowed. Later, over celebratory chilled soup, Roll slumped next to him. They're renaming it the sacred emulsion, Roll muttered. They want to build a statue of you. Holding a whisk and a potato. Better than a war, Richard said. Roll looked at him. You were right, he said at last. About food. About bridges. Told you, Richard said, licking mayo off his finger. It's not just a condiment. It's a philosophy. Part 6, The Final Garnish. By the time Richard Beckett reached the Galactic Council chambers, he was carrying 3 spice racks, 2 emergency aioli kits, and a rolling suitcase that emitted the faint sound of soup bubbling. The galaxy, it seemed, had developed a taste. Following the culinary incidents on Grelks, Tel Prime, Varric 9, and Rulun, a previously obscure Earth food envoy had become a symbol of cultural upheaval. Species who hadn't changed a recipe in 500 years were now opening fusion diners. Civilizations that once fought over planetary resources were exchanging chutney samples. And now the final course was being served. Richard had been summoned to present his culinary framework for galactic unity at the Council of Species, a chamber so sacred it required at least 3 hats to enter. Richard wore 5. For luck. The chamber was cavernous, luminous, and unervingly quiet. Dozens of species floated, hovered, oozed, or blinked in respectful silence. At the center, a raised platform waited. Behind it, the council chair, a 7-eyed, calcium-based entity named Glather, drummed its bony fingers. You have disrupted tradition, Glather intoned. You have introduced unauthorized emulsions. You have caused spontaneous nostalgia. You unleashed flavor. Explain yourself. Richard cleared his throat and stepped forward. Right, he said. Here's the thing. For eons, this council has governed treaties, commerce, and the occasional war. You've debated diplomacy, weapons, and planetary ethics. But you never once addressed the single most unifying force in existence. A pause. Snacks, Richard said. The Rulun ambassador hummed in agreement. I brought a proposal, Richard continued. And a sample. He opened his suitcase. Out came small, shimmering dishes, miniature earth plates, 1 per species, crafted to each culture's dietary and sensory profile. Some steamed. Some glowed. One softly sang jazz. Each was garnished with something unique. Something forbidden. Something beautiful. A single, perfect dollop of sauce. What is that? Whispered a multi-lobed creature from the ion clusters. This, Richard said with reverence, is the final garnish. A blend of every flavor I've learned across your worlds. It has Vorqual essence, scentwave resin, smoked lava salt, Rulunian emulsion, and paprika. Always paprika. He stepped back. And waited. The tasting began. The Zephyri ambassador inhaled deeply. Her spiracles fluttered. The Varic culinarch dipped a claw, sizzled it on a heated plate, and roared with satisfaction. The Rulon elder vibrated so hard he accidentally launched into a sympathy tube and had to be gently rotated back into place. Even Glather, whose palate was more mineralogical than gustatory, allowed a single drop to be absorbed through a calcite pore. And then, something extraordinary happened. Each ambassador looked at another species, one they historically disliked, and offered their plate. A Squell 11 shared with a Flarnack. A Nibloth let a Hume sip their sauce. A Vraxian handed a fork to a sentient mist and said, "Try this." Gasps echoed. A diplomat from the Ort fragments whispered, "This is not diplomacy. This is potluck." Richard beamed. Exactly. The food's not the point. Sharing is. Collaboration through flavor. Empathy by meal. If we can taste each other's stories, maybe we can stop blowing up each other's planets. There was a pause. And then. The chamber erupted. Not in chaos. In applause. Clapping, slapping, thudding, chirping, flashing lights, scent clouds, every species applauded in its own way. Even the council chair cracked open a celebratory carbonate crust. Richard Beckett had done the unthinkable. He had fed the galaxy into understanding. Later, on the council terrace, Richard and Rull sat on a bench overlooking the starlit capital rings. "You were right," Rull said at last, sipping a tiny cup of chilled mango umami reduction. "I underestimated the power of food." Richard grinned, swirling a spoon in his own bowl. "It's not just sustenance. It's story. It's memory. It's how we tell the universe who we are, without saying a word." Rull glanced sideways. "So what's next?" Richard's eyes twinkled. "I'm thinking, cookbook." Rull groaned. "Please. Not titled Death by Flavor." Richard opened his datapad. Galactic Fusion, 50 recipes that accidentally united the known universe. With a wink, he added, bonus chapter, How to Weaponize Mayonnaise, Ethically. Rull sighed. "You're impossible." "I'm hungry," Richard replied. "Same thing." They sat in silence, watching as dozens of ambassadors departed with to-go bags and diplomatic leftovers. A new age had begun. And it started, as all good ages do. With a perfect sauce. The end. If you liked this sci-fi story, subscribe to the channel to not miss new stories.